All right, I am here to introduce you to the UDL lesson template. This is our first draft, so I'm sure this will change over the course of the year, but there are very important categories here which won't, and I'm going to make sure I walk you through those. First off, it's important to recognize that we're not talking about a lesson in terms of a block. We're really talking about a mini lesson, so about 20 to 30 minutes should be what you have in mind. This part, hopefully you've come in to this session thinking about this. Which course, what block, what day are you going to actually be teaching this lesson? Because the idea is for you to actually teach this lesson next week and have it part of your first week with students. Make sure you've identified the grade level and the phase. Now, this is an individual activity, even though you're going to get some feedback and have a chance to reflect with your department. So, but when we do it with the lesson study, you'll do it with a minimum of 3 people. And it can work up to 5 or 6. So when planning the lesson, I actually find starting with the teaching point, starting with the objective, it's the most important way to begin. So I want you to identify an ATL that you know that students are going to need to be successful, particularly in this one unit, and connect it to the summative assessment. So whichever course you've identified, whichever grade level you've identified, think about that summative assessment and then use that to help you brainstorm what your teaching point is going to be. Your objective is going to be achievement in one of the ATLs. Now, I find it easy enough to brainstorm the skills, even specific to your subject group, to your content, and then go ahead and map those back onto an ATL. There's so many of them, you're almost certain to find one that fits. And that brings us really to the context. The connection with a unit is hugely important for you to maintain alignment, but also for the students. If you're going to introduce an explicit ATL lesson, it's really important that you help students see how this ATL, the mastery of this ATL, is going to help them. And I find that, especially with upper school students, if you're connecting the ATL mastery to success on the summative assessment, you're going to have far better engagement. All right, so now we've identified the class, we've connected it to the unit, we know what our teaching point is, we've identified our ATL. The next step is to brainstorm evidence. So in a minute, when I introduce you to the sample, I'll talk more about specific examples of what this could look like. But what you want to do is say, this is the ATL I've chosen. What would it look like? What would it sound like? When I'm circulating around the class, when I'm taking notes on students' progress, when I'm collecting an exit ticket, what would success towards mastery of this ATL look like? And you want to make sure you list those. This is very much the backwards planning approach. Once you've identified that, this is where it really starts to become UDL. You need to spend some time really brainstorming what are the barriers to success, barriers to students achieving the benchmark that you've laid out there in your teaching point and your objective. What's going to get in the way? This can be related to a student who's benefiting from learning support, and it could be related to their disability. It could be related to a student in EAL and their journey along the language acquisition trail. But it also can be background knowledge. It can be motivation. It can be focus. It can be a large number of things. It's not just about a student that that is struggling, may be identified with a disability, or be served by the language department. Here, it's also important to think about your gifted learners, your higher end learners. If for some students, being bored because they've already mastered the material is a significant barrier to them being able to demonstrate what they've learned. So keep all of them in mind and brainstorm, 4, 5, 6 would be best, different barriers that you know are going to happen. You've taught these lessons before, or you know this grade level, or you know our students. What are the things that they're going to struggle with? This is where it becomes a little bit more of a sorting activity. You're going to connect to those barriers to the 3 principles of universal design for learning. So you identify a particular barrier. Is it an issue of engagement? Is it an issue of representation? Or is it an issue of action and expression? And by looking at these guidelines, it'll help you understand them. As you recall, these are the principles, these are the guidelines, these are the checkpoints. You think about something like being distracted. That's, oh, maybe the students aren't interested enough. And what I need to do is minimize threats and distraction. So what you're going to do is just put those down, sort them out into the different categories, and then take a moment, pause, think about the summative assessment, think about the real, what looks like, sounds like ATL objective evidence, and choose the one that you think is the one biggest barrier. There may be lots of barriers. Choose the one that is the most important. Once you have that barrier identified, we're going to pivot to picking a UDL strategy that will help to have students overcome those barriers, or through the strategy, we're going to remove those barriers. And so now we're shifting back into the principles of UDL. What are some potential ways, once we've identified this specific barrier, that we can think of a strategy, brainstorm a strategy from multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, multiple means of action and expression. The example I use, I talk about active listening, and active listening and then focus being a barrier. So active listening being the ATL skill, focus being the barrier, and then I'm looking at modeling what active listening looks like real time in front of students. So I might want to double click. That's how you get the X to go in the box. Check the X, and that might be the area that I'm focused on. Now you're going to go straight down deeper into a specific strategy. And what I like to use, and you're not always going to use this, and you're going to have lots of other sources for your strategies, but this is a great strategy, a great list of strategies. So let's go and take a look. These are UDL aligned strategies from Goalbook. There's a lot of stuff that we don't pay for. This is a free website. And what it does, which I love, is that it takes the 3 principles of universal design for learning and it turns them into strategies that you can apply in the classroom. So strategies for engagement, strategies for representation, strategies for expression. You take the principle, you've identified your barrier, and you're really looking through these guidelines and checkpoints to see where the most help is going to come from in terms of a big bang for your buck strategy. So, just to take the one on the top here, if you're worried about engagement and making sure the students are interested because maybe the topic isn't as exciting as you want it to be, then you're going to look for ways to optimize individual choice and autonomy, because that's going to help you recruit interest. And what I love about it is that now there are a bunch of strategies that you can look at that will help you maximize and optimize individual choice, which will lead to improved engagement and interest. All right, so what you're going to do is once you've found your strategy that you like, make sure you record the checkpoint. That's the subcategory. The guideline is the category. The principle is one of the big 3. Make sure you record those there just to make sure that you're thinking about how these fit in. And then you're going to come down here and plan your lesson. I was working with lower school, and they obviously in kindergarten are going to see this in a very different way. They're saying maybe it'll be 5 minutes and 5 minutes. Think developmentally, what's the most appropriate for your students. Typically, and it doesn't have to follow this format, but this is a typical format, teacher spends 10 to 15 minutes introducing the skill, modeling the skill, some guided practice, and then the students are going to spend 10 to 15 minutes working on their own. So work out the plan that fits your students, that fits the content, the material. Make sure you list whatever materials you're going to need, and you're good to go. Down here, we have some reflection questions, which we'll use later on. You don't have to concern yourself in the first stage with this. But thank you for listening. This has been an introduction to the lesson plan template. If you'd like to see what it really looks like in action, please go ahead and click on the next link, which will give you an actual example that I've worked through. All right, good luck.